Chapter title page, The Higgs Horizon by Arthur F. Iceley. In the grimy heart of Outpost Theta-9, where the air thrummed with the relentless symphony of industrial fans and the tang of ozone stung Elias Thorne's nostrils, he hunched over a bank of flickering CRT monitors. His fingers, stained with grease from years of wrestling with temperamental machinery, danced over controls that hummed with raw power. The Higgs field stabilizers pulsed before him, coils vibrating like restless beasts in their metallic cages. Elias squinted at the dancing lines of code on the screens, his lower back a dull ache from hours spent bent over circuits and hydraulics. His coveralls, once a crisp gray, now bore the patina of countless shifts. Blue Federation patch faded but legible on his chest. The comms unit on his wrist crackled to life with Lana's voice, warm as sunlight cutting through the station's perpetual gloom. "Elias," she said, her tone laced with amusement. "Still coaxing that old beast into submission," he smirked, reaching up to rub the back of his neck. "You know me, always the charmer. These stabilizers are more temperamental than a teenager on their first date." Lana laughed, a sound that softened the harsh edges of the control room. "More like you love those engines more than what?" he interrupted playfully. She chuckled again. "Than me, apparently." Elias grinned wider, shaking his head even though she couldn't see it. "You know better. Besides, once I'm back on a core world, no more industrial hum. Just you and real coffee, none of that reconstituted stuff." "Promises, promises," Lana teased. "Cross my heart," Elias replied, tapping his chest with the hydrospanner he held. The metal clanged softly against his coveralls, echoing in the vast room, and maybe a little less ozone for the lungs. The banter flowed easily between them, as natural as the hum of the machinery around him. It was their ritual, a way to keep the distance between them bearable. Suddenly, the comms unit flickered. Elias' smile faded, replaced by a frown as he tapped it nervously. "Lana," static hissed through the speaker before cutting out entirely, leaving only the eerie silence of the control room. The hum of the stabilizers seemed to grow louder in the void, a discordant chorus against the sudden stillness. Elias' heart quickened as he scanned the monitors. Warning lights blinked red across the panels, casting an ominous glow over his face. He stood abruptly, hydrospanner clenched tightly. The control room, once warm with the amber light of consoles and Lana's voice, now felt cold and alien. A deafening alarm pierced the air, and Elias' breath hitched as he realized. This was no malfunction. This was an attack, Krell aggression. The last thing Elias registered before chaos erupted was the harsh silence of the comms unit, a stark reminder that Lana was out there, waiting for him to return home. His world shifted from warm humor to cold terror in an instant, and with it, every second counted as he moved swiftly into action mode. Elias Thorne's fingers hovered over the comm panel, the hum of the station a familiar lullaby in his ears. Lana's laughter echoed through the speaker, a warm sound that seemed to fill the sterile confines of the Higgs core. His own chuckle died mid-note as the line went dead. The sudden silence was more deafening than any alarm could be. He blinked, brow furrowing as he tapped the comm panel again, but only static greeted him. A faint vibration rumbled through the deck, so subtle it could have been his imagination. Then came a second tremble, stronger this time, and the station groaned like an awakened beast. Elias' heart kicked into overdrive, hammering against his ribs as if trying to escape. His breath hitched, fogging in the air that had turned suddenly icy. He glanced around the core, eyes wide and scanning for any sign of what was happening beyond the thick glass viewport behind him. The retro-futuristic machinery hummed nervously, bulgy levers twitching slightly, and CRT screens flickered with alarming static. Through the viewport, a monstrous shape loomed in the void. A Krell ship, bulky, jagged edges like a nightmare carved from dark metal. It was nothing like the sleek, efficient designs of the Federation or the graceful curves of the Ilarian vessels he'd seen in hollow archives. This thing was brutal, industrial, and utterly alien. Elias' palms slicked with cold sweat as another impact shook the station. Alarms blared to life, piercing the silence with a harsh, urgent wail. Red emergency lights flashed, casting the core in a pulsating crimson glow that reflected off the glass, painting the Krell ship in an eerie, ominous light. He could see more of them now, boarding pods slamming into the hull like meteorites, spewing orange flames from their exhausts as they latched onto the station's skin. The defenses Elias had helped install, laser turrets and ion cannons, sparked feebly before falling silent under the Krell onslaught. Panic surged through him, but he pushed it down, focusing instead on the task at hand. He had to stabilize the Higgs core. If the Krell breached this section, if they got their hands, or whatever they used, on the core, the station would be ripped apart from within. Elias threw switches, his grease-stained fingers dancing over controls with practiced ease. The core's hum deepened, a defiant roar against the chaos outside. He could hear the distant clangs of battle, the distant screams of his fellow crewmates echoing through the station's vents like ghosts in the machinery. The Krell ship at the viewport shifted, a massive cannon rising from its underbelly like some mechanical leviathan surfacing from the depths. Elias froze, eyes locked onto the barrel as it swiveled to face him. Time seemed to slow, and he could almost feel the impact of what was coming. He ducked just as the glass exploded inwards, a shockwave of shrapnel and force hurling him across the core. Pain lanced through his side, but he didn't stop moving. Adrenaline fueled him, driving him to his feet even as the world tilted around him. The air was thick with dust and smoke, the alarm's wail now a distant howl. Elias staggered towards the emergency console, each step sending fresh waves of agony through his body. His hands fumbled over the controls, activating the manual overrides. If he could buy enough time, if he could keep the core stable. But even as he worked, he knew it was futile. The Krell were inside now, their harsh, guttural voices echoing through the station like thunder. This wasn't just an attack. It was an invasion. And Elias Thorne was trapped in the heart of it all, fighting a losing battle against the cold terror that threatened to consume him whole. In the pulsating heart of the station, Elias Thorne stood before the colossal console of the Higgs field stabilizers, a symphony of whirring gears and humming circuits stretching out like some mechanized beast before him. The air was thick with the acrid scent of ozone and the metallic tang of sweat, his own, beating on his forehead and stinging in his eyes. His gray Federation coveralls, emblazoned with the blue THORNE patch, were slick with grease from the countless levers and dials he'd wrestled into compliance. Elias' fingers dug into the cold steel of a lever as long as his forearm, its surface pitted and worn from years of use. It resisted him, groaning in protest as he pulled with all his might. The turbines behind the console screamed in response, a deafening cacophony that vibrated through his bones. Dial needles flickered wildly, their reflections dancing across his grimace like fractured stars. "The gravity well," he muttered, more to himself than any unseen listener. "It's a beast, but I know it's hunger." His hands were already blistered from the heat of the controls, the pain shooting up his arms like lightning. He gritted his teeth and leaned into it, using the agony as fuel. The station groaned around him, metal plates shuddering under the strain as Elias wrestled with forces beyond human comprehension. He glanced at a bank of analog dials, their needles quivering at the edges of their scales. The readings were insane, gravity flux spiking like a fever chart, but he could feel it in his gut. They weren't far off. A violet light began to seep from the core of the machinery, casting elongated shadows that danced macabrely around him. Elias' breath hitched as the gravity shifted, pressing down on his chest like an invisible vice. He gasped for air, lungs burning with each ragged inhale. The world tilted beneath his feet. The downhill pull toward the sun was relentless, a gravitational tide dragging at his limbs. But he held firm, fingers white-knuckled around the lever. The wormhole coalesced in the center of the room, a swirling vortex of violet and blue that seemed to defy all rational thought. It pulsed with energy, tendrils reaching out like spectral fingers, caressing the air with static charge. Elias could feel its hum resonating within him, a deep vibration that set his teeth on edge. "This is it," he rasped, voice barely audible over the mechanical din. "The Higgs gambit." With one final, monumental effort, he wrenching the lever down, locking it into place with a sickening clunk. The wormhole flared, its intensity doubling in an instant. The station shuddered violently, alarms blaring as emergency systems kicked in, too late to stop what had already begun. Elias staggered back, hands shaking and breath coming in ragged gasps. He'd done it. The sun's gravitational pull was now a weapon directed through the wormhole like some cosmic spear. But at what cost? He could only hope his gambit would be enough to turn the tide. For now, all he could do was stand amidst the chaos, eyes fixed on the vortex of destruction he'd unleashed. The station groaned again, a mournful lullaby sung in steel and plasma. And Elias Thorne, engineer extraordinaire, held onto consciousness by a thread, waiting for the inevitable repercussions of his daring maneuver. In the cold vastness of space, the silent ballet of destruction unfurled with a savage grace. The wormhole yawned wide like a maw carved from the fabric of reality itself, its edges pulsing with an eerie violet luminescence that clawed at the darkness. Outpost Theta-9 hung in the void, a battered testament to human resilience, its metal skin scarred and pitted from the relentless barrage of Krell fire. The blinding light of the star stretched out tendrils of searing radiance, reaching for the jagged silhouettes of Krell warships. They were monsters of dark metal and flickering orange exhaust. Their bulk, once a symbol of alien, might now reduce to playthings in the cosmic dance of gravity's edge. The ships writhed and twisted as the gravitational shear took hold, their forms contorting under stresses no hull was designed to withstand. Elias Thorne lay crumpled in the heart of the station, unconscious amidst the humming machinery of the core. His gray coveralls, once neatly pressed, were now a tattered mess of grease and grime, the blue THORNE patch frayed at the edges. The air was thick with the acrid scent of ozone and the distant rumble of dying systems. Outside, the Krell fleet convulsed in the star's relentless grip. Ships groaned as metals screamed under the onslaught of gravitational forces. Panels sheared off like shrapnel, spinning away into the void, glowing briefly from the inferno within before fading to cold darkness. Explosions bloomed like deadly flowers against the velvet backdrop of space, each one a stark testament to the fury unleashed by the wormhole's birth. The horrific beauty of it all was almost hypnotic. The Krell vessels were not so much destroyed as unmade, ripped apart at the atomic level and hurled into the star's ravenous maw. Their jagged forms dissolved into streaks of light, swallowed by the blaze that threatened to scorch Elias's retinas even through the station's reinforced viewports. The Theta-9 shuddered violently, its frame groaning under the strain. Emergency alarms wailed, a discordant symphony of clashing metal and desperate machinery fighting to maintain integrity. Consoles sparked and died, casting eerie shadows across the faces of those few remaining crew members who had not fled or perished. And then, as abruptly as it had begun, the storm of destruction abated. The wormhole's mouth shrank, its violet edges flickering like a dying flame before snuffing out entirely. The star, still blazing with malevolent radiance, receded to its normal brilliance, no longer a voracious beast but a distant, indifferent eye. Silence descended, thick and oppressive. Outpost Theta-9 drifted in the void, a ghost ship adrift among the ashes of war. The station's systems flickered back to life spasmodically, casting erratic beams of light through the shadows. Rescue teams moved cautiously through the labyrinthine corridors, their breaths echoing in the sudden stillness. They found Elias in the core, his body half buried under a cascade of fallen debris. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, a reassuring sign amidst the devastation. As they carefully extricated him from the rubble, the silence pressed down harder. The graveyard quiet was not one of peace but of exhaustion, a collective holding of breath after the tempest. The Krell were gone, their fleet reduced to stardust and memory, but at what cost? Elias stirred, his eyelids fluttering open to reveal eyes dulled by shock and fatigue. He blinked up at the faces hovering over him, recognition dawning slowly. "The station," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "They're working on it," one of the rescue team replied softly. "You did it, Elias. You saved us all." He nodded weakly, a ghost of a smile touching his lips before darkness claimed him once more. The silence held, heavy and profound, as Outpost Theta-9 began its long journey back from the brink. In the stark, gleaming briefing room of the Federation's flagship, the air hummed with a tension that was almost palpable. The walls, adorned with pulsating holographic displays and blinking consoles, cast an ethereal glow over the gathered officers. Through the vast viewport, the remnants of the Theta-9 hung in the void like a grim spectacle, wreckage being meticulously towed by blue and white Federation tugs, their lights flickering against the inky blackness of space. Elias Thorne stood at the head of the room, his fingers tracing the edges of a glowing star map projected onto the table. The gray officer's tunic he wore felt foreign on his shoulders, the blue name patch seeming to weigh heavier than any metal. His short, dark hair, still disheveled from the countless nights spent poring over data and reports, added to an air of weariness that clung to him like a second skin. Admiral Vance, stern and imposing in his dark blue uniform, watched Elias with a blend of scrutiny and curiosity. The Admiral's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, missed nothing. The way Elias' hands trembled slightly as he pointed out the trajectory of the Krell scout ships, the haunted look in his eyes that spoke volumes about the silence that had taken Lana. "Gentlemen," Admiral Vance began, his voice cutting through the hum of the room like a blade. "We have evidence that the attack on the Theta-9 was not merely a random raid. Our recovery teams found traces of Krell scout ships at the system's edge, ghosting the battle. They were observing." Elias nodded grimly, his voice barely above a whisper as he spoke for the first time since entering the room. "The scouts. They didn't engage directly. They watched like vultures waiting for the right moment to strike." His fingers moved across the star map, tracing the path of the elusive vessels. Admiral Vance leaned in closer, his gaze unwavering. "Elias, your insights into Krell technology have been invaluable. The Admiralty sees you as a crucial asset in this new endeavor. We're assembling an expeditionary fleet to follow the scouts' trajectory and uncover the source of their interest." The room fell silent for a moment before Elias' voice cut through the quiet. "I accept," he said, his tone resolute yet heavy with grief. He didn't look up from the map, his gaze fixed on the glowing paths that represented his new mission. Not for glory or patriotism, his decision was driven by a need to find the source of the evil that had silenced Lana's laughter and left him with only questions. Admiral Vance's expression softened marginally, though his voice remained firm. "Good. Your commission as Chief Scientific Officer will grant you the autonomy you need to pursue this investigation. We'll equip your ship with the latest in Federation technology. But remember, Elias, this is a reconnaissance mission first and foremost." Elias nodded, his mind already racing with plans and strategies. The ghostly paths on the map seemed to blur into the void beyond the viewport, where the wreckage of the Theta-9 served as a grim reminder of what was at stake. "Dismissed," Admiral Vance commanded, his gaze sweeping over the assembled officers before returning to Elias. As the room cleared, the two men stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared mission pressing down on them like an unspoken oath. Elias' hand rested on the table, fingers splayed as if reaching out to grasp something intangible. "I won't let her down," he whispered, more to himself than to the Admiral. The words hung in the air, a promise etched in sorrow and determination. Admiral Vance placed a firm hand on Elias' shoulder, his grip steady and reassuring. "We all have our demons, Thorne. Find yours, find the source, and we'll end this once and for all." With that, he turned and left the room, leaving Elias alone with the stars and the echoes of his past. As Elias stood there, the lights of the holographic map flickering around him like spectral guardians, he knew the path ahead was fraught with peril. But amidst the silence that haunted him, a spark of resolve burned brighter, a beacon guiding him toward answers, toward justice, and perhaps toward healing. Elias stood at the observation deck of Fleet Headquarters, a massive structure suspended in the cold grandeur of Neptune's orbit. The gas giant loomed behind him, a swirling blue and white behemoth streaked with storms older than human history. Before him, the deck stretched out like a crystal cathedral, transparent panels revealing the vastness of space and the endless dance of stars. The scale of it all was overwhelming. Countless ships drifted lazily in formation, their hulls gleaming under the distant sun's faint light. This was not the cozy confines of an academic lab or the cluttered corridors of a research vessel. This was power, raw and immense. A voice echoed through the deck, crisp and authoritative. "Ensign Thorne." Elias turned to see Captain Silas Vane approaching. The captain was square-jawed, with a scar running down his left cheek like a pale river carving through weathered stone. His dark blue uniform bore the insignia of Fleet Command, stark against the pristine white of Elias' officer's tunic. "Captain," Elias acknowledged, snapping to attention. Vane nodded, his gaze sweeping over Elias briefly before returning to the view ahead. "Welcome to the Aegis, Ensign. You're here because your calculations are impeccable, but this isn't a classroom. Out here, instinct matters just as much." Elias felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He was used to numbers, not gut feelings, but he kept his expression neutral. "Understood, sir." Vane led him through the sprawling station, their footsteps echoing down corridors lined with gleaming metal and humming consoles. They entered a briefing room where two other officers awaited them. The first was a woman in her 30s, her dark hair pulled back into a severe bun, warm brown eyes assessing Elias with a mixture of curiosity and professionalism. "This is First Officer Mara Kovic," Vane introduced. "She'll be your direct superior on matters of ship security and protocol." Kovic offered a small nod. "Welcome aboard, Ensign." The other officer leaned against a console, his light blue uniform casual despite the precision of his movements. Messy blonde hair framed a charismatic face, and he grinned at Elias like they were old friends. "And this," Vane continued, "is Chief Navigator Jerk Thalos." Elias extended his hand hesitantly. "Nice to meet you both." Jerk took it with a firm grip and a wink. "Jerk's our jump jockey," Vane explained. "He'll show you the ropes of spatial navigation and hopefully keep your calculations grounded in reality." Elias felt a surge of something unfamiliar, nervousness, perhaps excitement. He trusted his numbers more than anything else, but there was an allure to the unpredictability Jerk seemed to embody. Vane's next stop was the medbay, a gleaming expanse of sterile brightness. The air hummed with the soft whirring of machinery and the distant beep of monitors. Elias was struck by how different this place was from anything he'd seen before. Bulky medical tech cast dramatic shadows, while analog dials spun lazily on consoles that looked like they belonged in a 1950s pulp magazine. Dr. Maria Korv stood beside one such console, her white tunic emblazoned with the red caduceus patch of Fleet Medical. She glanced up as they entered, warm brown eyes meeting Elias' gaze with an intensity he wasn't expecting. "Ensign Thorne," she greeted, gesturing to the exam table behind him. "Please have a seat." Elias complied, feeling slightly off-kilter. Vane and Kovic exchanged glances before stepping back to let Maria work. Jerk lingered briefly, grinning at Elias with an unspoken promise of adventure. "First things first," Maria began, her tone pragmatic yet gentle. "I need to run a full scan." She moved efficiently through the checks, her fingers dancing over controls that seemed as archaic as they were advanced. The room buzzed with activity. Scanners hummed, lights flickered, and Elias tried his best not to fidget under Maria's meticulous examination. "You're in decent shape," she noted, peering at a reading on an old-fashioned monitor. "But your caffeine intake is through the roof. You'll need to cut back if you want those reflexes sharp." Elias grimaced. "I've been told that before," Maria chuckled. "By civilians, trust me, out here one wrong move could get you killed. Coffee isn't going to save you from a void breach." He nodded soberly. "Noted, Doctor." After the screening, Elias found himself back in the bustling corridors of the Aegis, following Jerk toward their shared quarters. The navigator chattered non-stop about jump coordinates and stellar currents, his enthusiasm infectious despite Elias' initial reservations. As they stepped into their cabin, a compact space with 2 bunk beds and a small console, Jerk pulled out a steaming cup from a nearby dispenser. "Here," he offered, handing it to Elias. "Station coffee. It'll put hair on your chest." Elias took a sip cautiously, grimacing at the bitter taste. Yet there was something comforting about the ritual, this shared moment of camaraderie despite their vastly different approaches to navigation. "Thanks," Elias said, settling onto his bunk, "for everything." Jerk clinked his mug against Elias in a mock toast. "Welcome aboard, Thorne. We'll make a jump jockey out of you yet, or at least keep those numbers grounded." Elias smiled weakly, feeling a reluctant bond form between them. Perhaps this wasn't so different from academia after all. A mix of precision and intuition, calculation and chance. He sipped his coffee again, letting the bitter warmth seep into him as he gazed out at Neptune's swirling storms through the porthole. The vastness of space awaited, both daunting and exhilarating. But for now, this tiny cabin was home, a starting point for a journey into the unknown. The bridge of the Aegis thrummed with an electric tension, a symphony of humming consoles and the low murmur of officers at their stations. Elias Thorne stood rigidly at his console, eyes locked onto the swirling patterns of the Higgs field readings. The air was thick with anticipation, charged like the moment before a storm breaks. He could feel it, the pulse of the jump drives beneath his feet, a vibration that resonated through the deck plates and into his bones. Captain Vane, in his dark blue uniform adorned with silver insignia, stood at the center of the bridge, hands clasped behind his back. His gaze swept over the assembled crew, settling finally on Elias. "Ready, Thorne?" His voice was steady, but Elias detected a subtle edge of anticipation. Elias nodded, swallowing the knot in his throat. "Ready, Captain." Jerk Thalos, at the navigation console, ran a hand through his disheveled hair before pressing a sequence of commands into his interface. The holographic star chart above him flickered, tracing the path they would take through the cosmos. "All ships report ready for the jump," Jerk announced, his voice barely masking the excitement beneath. "Coordinates locked and loaded." Captain Vane's gaze flicked to Elias once more before he gave a sharp nod. "Initiate jump sequence." Elias' fingers hovered over the control panel, heart pounding like a drum in his chest. He took a deep breath and pressed down. The world around him seemed to stretch and warp. The lights on the bridge flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced across the bulkheads. Elias' vision swam as the light from the viewscreen bent into abstract ribbons of color, purple and black tendrils snaking through space like some cosmic serpent. The groan of the Aegis hull echoed through the ship, a low, metallic whine that set Elias' teeth on edge. The nausea hit him like a physical blow, churning his stomach as if he were plummeting down an endless well. Gravity shifted beneath his feet, pulling him downward in a disorienting rush. He braced himself against the console, knuckles white as he fought to keep his balance. The sensation of falling was almost overwhelming, but he gritted his teeth and held on. Beside him, Captain Vane stood like an unyielding pillar, though Elias saw the captain's grip tighten on the railing before them. Jerk at navigation grunted, his face pale as he stared resolutely into the vortex that swallowed their view. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the sensation ceased. The groaning of the hull faded to a low hum, and the distorted light snapped back into focus, revealing a new starfield. Elias gasped, catching his breath as the normal pull of gravity returned. The bridge crew exchanged relieved glances, but there was no time for respite. The Aegis had jumped once. Now it would do so again and again, each leap carrying them closer to the edge of known space. "Next coordinates locked," Jerk called out, his voice already steadying as he prepared for the next jump. Elias turned back to his console, fingers dancing over the controls. The Higgs field readings pulsed steadily, guiding him through the complex ballet of gravitational forces that would pull them to their destination. He could feel it, the rhythm of the jumps, the pulse of the void, and he let it guide him as they plunged deeper into the unknown. System after system blurred past them in a dizzying sequence, the twin suns of Epsilon-7 flickering like dying embers, the ice giants of Zeta-12 looming large and cold, the nebula of Gamma-9, a swirling maelstrom of gas and dust. Each jump was a trial of endurance, a battle against the forces that sought to tear them apart. The tension on the bridge rose with each leap. Elias could feel it in his bones, a growing unease that prickled at the back of his neck like an unseen gaze. They were nearing the boundary now, the silent void, where the Krell scouts had been found adrift and silent. As they braced for another jump, Elias glanced at Captain Vane. The captain's expression was unreadable, but there was a new tightness around his eyes. They both knew what lay ahead, the abyss of the unknown where stars were scarce and the silence deafening. Elias steeled himself, hands gripping the console as they plunged once more into the vortex. The groan of the hull filled his ears. The nausea surged again, but this time it was tempered by determination. They would face whatever awaited them in the silent void, not with fear, but with resolve. For beyond that boundary lay answers to questions humanity had pondered for centuries, and Elias Thorne intended to be there when they found them. The bridge of the FNS Aegis hummed with an electric tension as the stars beyond the reinforced glass viewports stretched into luminous streaks and then snapped back into pinpoints of light. The jump drive had spit them out of the void like a cosmic pebble from a slingshot, and the sudden shift in perspective left Elias Thorne's stomach churning. He gripped the armrest of his console, knuckles pale, as he stared at the now familiar yet ever-unchanging expanse. Then, without warning, the sensors pinged, a sharp, insistent beep that cut through the low hum of the bridge. The sound echoed like a drumbeat in Elias' ears, and he felt a cold prickle spread across his skin. He leaned forward, eyes scanning the readouts as data flickered to life on the holographic display hovering above his console. "What do we have?" Captain Vane barked from his seat at the center of the bridge. His voice was steady, but Elias could sense the undercurrent of anticipation, a coiled spring ready to snap. "Sir," Elias said, his voice tight as he wrestled with the data streaming in, "sensors are picking up multiple contacts. Massive energy signatures. They're not natural." The room seemed to hold its breath. The bridge crew exchanged glances, their hands hovering over controls like nervous birds poised for flight. "On screen," Vane ordered, his voice a low growl that sent ripples of urgency through the air. The main viewport flickered and then displayed an image that made Elias' heart seize. A swarm of dark, jagged shapes floated in the void, their edges sharp and unyielding against the soft glow of distant stars. Krell warships, bulkier than anything the Federation had ever faced, bristling with weapons that pulsed with an ominous orange light. The Krell ships turned as one, a grotesque ballet of death machines pivoting to face the Aegis. Their movements were synchronized, precise, and Elias felt a shiver run down his spine at the sight. They weren't just there, they were waiting. Waiting for them, battle stations. Vane's voice cut through the shock like a knife. "All hands, battle stations, we're under Krell contact." The bridge erupted into chaos as alarms blared and red lights pulsed rhythmically. Elias watched as crew members sprang into action, their faces etched with determination. He took a deep breath, his fingers dancing over the console to feed data to tactical. Elias could still feel the warmth of Maria's smile from earlier that day in the mess hall. The memory was a small comfort amidst the cold precision of the Krell formation. Her laughter had been genuine, her eyes kind, as she nudged him out of his solitude with a tray full of food and banter about nothing at all. Now that moment felt like a distant dream, swallowed by the harsh reality of war. He analyzed the Krell positions, mapping their vectors and calculating probabilities. They were protecting something. An anomaly in the data revealed a mining station tucked behind the dense cluster of warships. The station was a glinting speck amidst the dark metal hulks, its silhouette familiar yet alien in this context. "Captain," Elias called out over the din, "the Krell are positioned to defend that mining station at all costs." Vane's gaze flicked from the screen to Elias, his expression grim. "Understood. We need intel on what they're protecting. Tighten our sensors, Thorne. Let's see if we can give them something to think about besides just a target." Elias nodded, turning back to his console with renewed focus. The Aegis shuddered slightly as shields hummed to life, the sound of engines revving up echoing through the deck plates. The ship was awake now, ready for battle. As Elias delved deeper into the sensor data, he couldn't shake the sense that they were teetering on the edge of something vast and unforgiving, a void filled with more than empty space. The Krell fleet loomed before them like a dark wall, an unyielding barrier between the Aegis and whatever secrets lay hidden in this system. And as the first salvo of energy pulses streaked toward their position, Elias braced himself for the storm to come. Chapter 9, the iron knot the bridge of the Federation cruiser Ian hummed with tension, the air thick with the scent of ozone and the sharp tang of adrenaline. Elias Thorne stood at his station, eyes scanning the holographic display that floated above the console. The mining station, a sprawling construct of steel and shadow, loomed large on the screen, its silhouette stark against the muted gray of the nearby planet. Surrounding it like a swarm of metallic bees were the Krell warships, bulbous and menacing, their dark hulls bristling with weapons. Captain Silas Vane barked orders from the command chair, his voice a low growl. All batteries, target the lead Krell ship. Let's see if we can't shake their formation. Elias zoomed in on one of the Krell vessels, his gaze tracing the patterns of energy that pulsed across its shields. He saw the problem immediately. Their point defense systems were not just fierce but adaptable, tracking and intercepting Federation missiles with an eerie precision. "What are you seeing, Thorne?" Vane's voice cut through the chaos, sharp as a blade. Elias tapped his console, cross-referencing shield frequencies. "Their defenses are sophisticated, sir. They're adapting to our railgun patterns faster than anything we've seen before. Can you counter it?" "I'm working on it." Elias' fingers danced over the controls, recalibrating the fire pattern. He adjusted the frequency of their railguns, hoping to catch the Krell off guard with a new variable. The Ian shuddered as another volley from the Krell ships impacted its shields. The bridge lights flickered briefly before stabilizing. Elias' eyes narrowed as he watched the Krell formations. They weren't just defending randomly, they were specifically shielding parts of the station. "What do you make of their positioning, Thorne?" Vane asked, noticing Elias' scrutiny. Elias pointed to a series of vents on the underside of the station. "Those exhaust ports, something's coming out of them. Whatever they're processing down there isn't just ore. It's volatile." Vane leaned forward, his scar standing out starkly against his weathered skin. "Volatile how? They're shielding those ports like they're protecting a hive," Elias said, his voice rising over the din of battle. "I think they're processing some kind of energy or material that could be used as a weapon." Vane's expression darkened. "Can we hit those ports without getting blasted to smithereens?" Elias shook his head. "Not with direct fire. Their point defense is too strong, but if we can find a structural weak point in their formation." He zoomed out, studying the layout of Krell ships. There was a gap, a small one, but it could be exploited. Elias highlighted it on the holographic display and sent the coordinates to the tactical station. "Focus fire on this vector," he instructed the ensign at the railgun controls. "It's our best shot at disrupting their shields." The Ian's railguns roared to life, spewing a torrent of projectiles toward the identified weak point. The Krell ships reacted instantly, but Elias had timed it perfectly. The first few volleys slipped through their defenses, slamming into the station's shielding. "Direct hit," Vane shouted, his voice triumphant. "Keep at it." The battle raged on, the void lit up by explosions and tracer fire. Elias worked feverishly, adjusting frequencies and angles, pushing the Federation's technology to its limits. The Krell fought back with a ferocity that matched their desperation, their ships weaving and diving like metallic predators. Elias could see it now. The station wasn't just mining, it was refining something dangerous. And the Krell were willing to die to protect it. This was more than just a resource conflict. It was a fight for survival on both sides. He felt a grim satisfaction as another volley breached their defenses, but the realization left him cold. "We're making headway, Captain," Elias reported, his voice steady despite the chaos. "But they're not backing down." Vane nodded, his grip tightening on the armrest of his chair. "Neither will we, Thorne. Keep pushing. We need to break this iron knot." The battle raged on, a symphony of destruction and defiance echoing through the cold vastness of space. Elias Thorne stood at the heart of it, an engineer in a storm, trying to unravel the tangle of metal and fire that threatened to consume them all. In the grimy belly of the Krell station, Elias Thorne found himself pressed between the cold metal bulkhead and a wall slick with some viscous, alien fluid that smelled like ozone mixed with the acrid tang of old sweat and something else, something profoundly otherworldly. The stench clawed at the back of his throat, a constant reminder that he was far from any Federation outpost or the sterile comforts of the starship's engineering bay. The corridor stretched ahead like a gullet, lined with pipes that throbbed rhythmically, pulsing with whatever vile energy coursed through the Krell's veins. The air hummed with a low, menacing vibration, making Elias' teeth rattle and his fillings ache. He hugged the wall, his fingers tracing the rough, pitted surface as he followed the squad of Marines. Vane had been adamant about the boarding action. "We need to cut off their reinforcements," the captain had growled, his voice a low rumble over the comms. Elias hadn't argued, he knew the stakes. But when Vane assigned him to the team, Elias' heart sank like a stone. He was an engineer, not a soldier. Yet here he was, in a marine combat vest that chafed against his shoulders, clutching a pulse rifle that felt as alien in his hands as the station around him. The Marines moved with practiced ease, weapons raised and ready. Their boots thudded heavily on the grated metal floor, echoing through the narrow passage like a countdown to doom. Elias tried to match their pace but stumbled, his foot catching on a twisted length of cable snaking across the deck. A Marine behind him caught his elbow, steadying him with a firm grip. "Stay close," the Marine grunted, voice muffled by his helmet's visor. Elias nodded, swallowing hard as he tried to focus on keeping up rather than the roiling nausea in his stomach. The first Krell warrior loomed out of the shadows like a nightmare given form. Bulky and towering, its leathery grayish-brown skin glistened under the harsh, flickering lights. Industrial metallic armor encased its body, orange accents glowing malevolently against the grim darkness. Elias froze, pulse rifle shaking in his hands, as the Marine squad sprang into action. Bolts of plasma fire streaked through the air, illuminating the corridor with eerie flashes. The Krell roared, a guttural sound that seemed to reverberate inside Elias' skull. It charged, heavy boots pounding against the deck. A Marine stepped forward, taking the brunt of the assault. The two figures clashed in a whirlwind of sparks and snarls. Elias watched, paralyzed by terror, as the Marine fought with desperate ferocity. The Krell's strength was brutal, almost inhuman. But the Marine held his ground, driving a combat knife into the alien's side before it could retaliate. The Krell stumbled back, roaring again, this time a sound of pain and rage. "Move," someone shouted, shoving Elias forward. He stumbled, nearly falling as he was propelled deeper into the station's bowels. His breath hitched in his chest, each gasp tasting like the acrid air around him. The corridor seemed to close in on him, walls pressing closer with every step. As they rounded a corner, Elias glimpsed more Krell. Not warriors this time, but something else. Slave workers, perhaps. Gaunt figures hunched over consoles or dragging heavy crates. Their eyes held a dull fear, darting nervously towards the fighting before quickly looking away. The hierarchy was clear. These creatures were mere pawns in whatever sinister game the Krell played. Elias' mind raced, trying to piece together what he saw. He couldn't help but think of the Federation's rigid structure, where every rank had its place and purpose. But here it felt different, more visceral, more brutal. These beings lived under a constant threat, their lives reduced to servitude or battle. The squad pushed forward, leaving the workers behind. Elias tried to focus on his mission. Reach the core, disable the defenses. But every step was agony, each breath a struggle against the oppressive atmosphere. His fingers twitched on the rifle, knuckles white as he gripped it tighter. Ahead, another figure appeared. A Krell commander, if the elaborate armor and insignia were any indication. It raised a weapon unlike anything Elias had seen before, a staff that crackled with raw energy. The Marines opened fire, but the commander's shield deflected the blasts effortlessly. "Fall back," Vane's voice boomed over the comms. "Thorne, get to that core." Elias hesitated, then surged forward as the Marines retreated. His heart pounded wildly, drowning out all other sounds except his own ragged breathing. He skidded around another bend and found himself in a vast chamber filled with towering machinery. The air throbbed with power, making his hair stand on end. The core, it pulsed before him, a writhing mass of energy contained within a web of crystalline structures. Elias approached cautiously, pulse rifle now forgotten at his side. He reached out a tentative hand, feeling the hum against his fingertips. Behind him, the sound of battle raged on, distant but unrelenting. The Krell's society was a living nightmare, but he had to focus. One misstep here could blow them all to pieces. With trembling fingers, Elias began to work, tracing circuits and rerouting power flows. Sweat beaded his forehead, dripping into his eyes as he wrestled with alien technology. Each adjustment sent shocks through his body, jolts of raw energy that left him gasping. But slowly, methodically, he did it. The station's defenses flickered, then stuttered to a halt. A deafening silence fell over the chamber, broken only by the distant echoes of gunfire. Elias sagged against the core, exhaustion washing over him like a tide. He had done it, disabled the defenses without destroying everything. But at what cost? A low growl behind him sent a jolt of terror through his veins. Turning slowly, Elias found himself face to face with another Krell warrior. This one was different. Its eyes held not just rage, but a glimmer of fear. The warrior snarled, brandishing a blade that seemed more organic than metallic. Elias raised his rifle, hands shaking as he pointed it at the creature. But there was no aggression in the Krell's stance, just a desperate plea for survival. And in that moment, amidst the clamor and chaos, Elias Thorne saw something he'd never expected: empathy. Not for himself, but for the being before him. A silent acknowledgement of their shared struggle against an unforgiving universe. The interrogation room aboard the Aegis was a stark contrast to the organic, chaotic landscape of the mining station they had secured. The walls were pristine white, reflecting the harsh glow of overhead luminescent panels that cast long, dramatic shadows across the cold metal floor. A single, sturdy table stood in the center, bolted down and scarred by time and use, surrounded by 3 chairs of identical design, hard, unyielding, and devoid of comfort. Elias Thorne leaned over the table, his short dark hair brushing against the cool surface as he studied Grell. The Krell overseer was a bulking mass of grayish-brown leathery skin stretched taut over heavy muscle, his metallic armor adorned with orange accents that seemed to bleed into the harsh lighting. His small, dark eyes darted around the room like a caged animal's, betraying the defiance he attempted to project. Grell's breath came in ragged gasps, his massive chest rising and falling rapidly despite his efforts to maintain an impassive facade. The clanking of his restraints as he shifted uneasily echoed through the sterile chamber, each metallic click a stark reminder of his captivity. First Officer Mara Kovic stood at the periphery, her dark blue uniform blending with the shadows cast by the harsh lighting. Her arms were crossed over her chest, eyes sharp and calculating as she observed the exchange. "Let's begin," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. Elias nodded, glancing at Grell before turning his gaze to Kovic. "Grell is afraid, Mara, more than just of us or this place. He's terrified of something or someone else." Kovic raised an eyebrow but said nothing, gesturing for Elias to continue. Elias turned back to Grell, his voice measured and calm. "What are you afraid of, Grell? What could possibly frighten a Krell overseer more than the Federation?" Grell snarled, baring rows of jagged teeth, but there was a tremor in his voice that belied his bravado. "You think I fear your pitiful questions, human? You know nothing of the Krell or our ways." Elias leaned closer, undeterred by Grell's display. "Then educate me. Tell us what we need to know, and perhaps we can help each other." Grell's dark eyes flashed with a mix of rage and fear. "Help? You think I need your help?" He laughed, a harsh, grating sound that sent shivers down Elias' spine. "You are but pawns in a game much larger than you comprehend." Kovic stepped forward, her voice like ice. "Then enlighten us, Grell. What is this game? Who are the players?" Grell hesitated, his gaze flickering between Elias and Kovic. For a moment it seemed as if he might speak, but then his expression hardened once more. "I will say nothing. You cannot break me." Elias exchanged a glance with Kovic before turning back to Grell. "We don't want to break you, Grell. We just need answers. And perhaps in return we can offer you something far more valuable than your freedom." Grell's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "And what is that?" Elias leaned in closer, his voice a low whisper. "Protection from whatever it is that truly frightens you." Chapter 12. The chain of command. Elias Thorne sat across from Grell, the Krell's massive frame restrained by magnetic shackles embedded in the cold metal floor. The interrogation room was sparse, lit only by harsh fluorescent lights that cast sharp shadows on Grell's leathery grayish-brown skin. Elias' eyes were weary but resolute as he leaned forward, his voice steady despite the tension coiling within him. "You understand why we're here, Grell?" Elias began, his fingers drumming lightly on the table between them. "We need answers, and you're going to give them to me." Grell's metallic armor clanked against the restraints as he shifted uncomfortably. His voice, when it came, was a low growl laced with fear. "You think I know something. The Krell are an empire, united, strong." Elias cut him off with a sharp gesture. "United or subjugated?" He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing as he studied the scars etched into Grell's skin, twisted lines that spoke of pain and dominance. Grell hesitated, then spat out a bitter laugh. Subjugated, you think we? And who are you really serving, Grell? Elias interjected, voice dropping to a near whisper. Who stands behind the Krell, pulling their strings? The Krell's breath hitched, his gaze flickering away from Elias' piercing stare. The room seemed to close in around him as he struggled with words that had never passed his lips before. They are the silent masters, Grell stammered, his voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. The tin. Elias felt a chill run down his spine at the name, spoken with such dread. And what do you know of these? Tin, Grell's eyes flicked to Elias, then back to the floor. I've never seen one, he confessed, voice barely audible. Only their enforcers, they wear masks, always masked. But the scars, he gestured vaguely at his own flesh. The scars are from them? Elias nodded slowly, his mind racing with new questions and revelations. The tin remained a shadow, faceless and terrifying, manipulating the Krell like pawns in some grand game. You said subjugated races, Grell, Elias prompted softly. What does that mean? Grell took a deep breath, his voice steadying slightly as he spoke of things long hidden. The Krell were not alone. There are others, many others. The tin brought us together under their rule. We fight for them, die for them. They take what they want and leave us with the scraps. Elias listened intently, his grip tightening on the edge of the table. The image of a vast, interconnected web of suffering races began to form in his mind, all tethered to the unseen hands of the tin. The interrogation ended with Grell's confession hanging heavy in the air. Elias stood, his knees creaking softly as he rose from the chair. He left the room, his steps echoing down the sterile corridor until he found himself on the observation deck. The vast viewport stretched before him like a canvas painted with stars. Their distant, cold light filled the chamber, casting long shadows and soft glows across the control panels. Elias stood there, hands clasped behind his back, gazing out at the cosmos. The weight of Grell's revelations pressed down on him, but in this quiet sanctuary he found a moment's peace. Footsteps approached softly from behind, and Dr. Maria Korv stepped up beside him. Her warm brown eyes met his briefly before turning to the starscape. She didn't press for details or demand explanations. Her presence was enough, a silent anchor in the storm of his thoughts. Sometimes, she began softly, I think about how small we are out here. Elias glanced at her, taking comfort in her calm demeanor. Small but not insignificant. She smiled gently, her gaze still fixed on the celestial expanse. No, not insignificant at all. They stood there together, almost touching, their breaths mingling in the cool air. Elias felt a strange sense of tranquility wash over him, a rare respite from the turmoil of his duties. Maria's presence was a grounding force, deepening the trust between them with each shared moment. In the hushed silence of the observation deck, under the watchful gaze of countless stars, Elias allowed himself to feel something other than the relentless pursuit of answers. He felt hope. In the quietude of Captain Sela's Vane's ready room, the hum of the Aegis engines was a low, steady heartbeat against the bulkhead. The air hung thick with the weight of unspoken strategies, and the residue of countless battles etched into the lines of Vane's weathered face. A holographic star map floated between him and Elias Thorne, its pulsating lights casting eerie shadows on the cold metal surfaces. The Krell mining system loomed in the display like a malignant growth, each node a grim reminder of the slave labor churning within. Elias stood rigid, his gray Federation tunic blending into the dimness, save for the sharp contrast of his dark hair against his pale brow. His eyes traced the network of mines and processing stations, each one a silent plea to the moral compass that drove him. Vane, square-jawed and stern, stared at the map with an intensity that betrayed the storm raging beneath his stoic exterior. The captain's voice, when it came, was a low rumble like distant thunder. We could level them, Thorne. End this Krell problem once and for all. Elias glanced at Vane, then back to the map. His fingers hovered over the holographic image as if he could pluck out the solution from the digital ether. And how many more Grell would we create? How many more slaves would rise in their place? Vane's scar twitched, a silent echo of the battles that had carved it into his flesh. It's war, Thorne. Casualties are inevitable. Elias nodded slowly, but his gaze did not waver from the map. I know, but what if there's another way? What if we can turn them? Vane scoffed, a harsh sound that echoed in the confined space. Turn them, they're monsters, Thorne, mindless beasts. Elias shook his head, a stubborn set to his jaw. They're slaves, Vane, forced into those machines, and if we can offer them something different, if we can give them hope. The captain's eyes narrowed, suspicion and skepticism warring in their depths. And what exactly are you proposing? Elias took a deep breath, the tension in his shoulders palpable. Release one of the prisoners, Grell, send him back with a message. Vane's brow furrowed into a storm cloud. A message to who? The machines? No, Elias replied, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. To the Krell, not a threat but an offer, protection if they revolt, a chance to live free. The captain's stare could have cut through steel. You want to negotiate with our enemies. Not enemies, Elias countered softly. Victims. Vane's fist slammed onto the console, making the hologram flicker. This isn't some moral crusade, Thorne. It's a military operation. Elias stood his ground, undeterred by Vane's anger. It can be both. The room fell silent again, save for the distant hum of the ship. Vane's gaze bored into Elias, searching for any hint of weakness or deception. Finally he spoke, his voice a low growl. You're playing a dangerous game, Thorne. Elias met his stare head-on. I know. Vane turned back to the map, his expression inscrutable. Very well, he said after a long moment. But if this backfires, it's on you. Elias nodded, the weight of the decision settling over him like a shroud. Understood. The tension in the room shifted subtly, the air thick with anticipation and dread. Vane activated his comms unit, barking orders to prepare for the risky maneuver. Elias watched as the holographic map flickered, adjusting to the new strategy. The fleet held its position, a vast armada of steel and fire suspended in the void, waiting to see if the Krell would bite at the chain. In the grimy, shadow-draped corner of an ancient Krell outpost, Elias Thorne leaned over a flickering CRT screen, its greenish glow casting eerie shadows on the weathered walls. The room was a jumble of retro-futuristic tech, humming and whirring with a life of its own, as if the very air was charged with static anticipation. Grell loomed beside him, the Krell's bulky form framed against the dim light filtering through vents high above. The metallic armor Grell wore bore the familiar orange accents that marked his allegiance to a faction within the Krell ranks, one they hoped might be swayed towards peace. Elias' fingers danced over the antiquated keyboard, each keystroke echoing in the silence like the ticking of some ancient clock. The schematic on the screen shifted and morphed under his touch, lines and symbols coalescing into a complex web of engineering brilliance. It was a shield override, a technical diagram that spoke volumes about Elias' understanding of Krell technology, a language he'd learned to decipher in the quiet hours between battles. This is it, Elias murmured, his voice low but steady. If Vrak and his faction can read this, they'll know we're not just Federation grunts throwing bombs. Grell's heavy eyes narrowed as he studied the diagram. The intensity in his gaze was unmistakable, a fierce concentration that spoke of shared experiences and a grudging respect for the human sitting beside him. Your people think with machines, Grell rumbled, his voice a low growl. But this is different. Elias glanced at Grell, seeing his reflection in the screen's glow, two figures hunched together like conspirators in a pulp novel. It's not just about machines, Elias replied softly. It's about understanding each other. Your tech isn't so different from ours once you look past the surface. The Krell commander's eyes flicked back to the schematic, tracing the intricate lines with a clawed finger. Vrak will see the truth here, he said. The path to override our defenses. It shows respect, Elias Thorne. Grell paused, his voice dropping even lower. And maybe. Hope, Elias nodded, feeling a strange kinship with the alien beside him. They were united in purpose, if not in origin. A Federation officer and a Krell warrior bonded over the shared language of engineering. He pointed to specific sections of the diagram, explaining each component as he did so. This node here, Elias said, tapping the screen. It's your equivalent of our power relays. Disrupt it just enough, and you create a feedback loop that shuts down the shield generators temporarily. Grell listened intently, his expression inscrutable beneath the harsh lines of his armor. When Elias finished, he leaned back, his metallic joints creaking softly in the stillness. "You understand our tech, human," Grell acknowledged, "and you have shown respect to Vrak and his fighters." Elias smiled, a faint curve of his lips visible in the dim light. "Then we just need to deliver this message where it will be seen." He hit a final key, and the schematic flickered one last time before solidifying into a complete diagram. Elias turned to Grell, determination burning in his eyes. "Let's make sure Vrak gets the whisper in the dark." With that, they stood, their silhouettes blending together against the backdrop of ancient technology. Two unlikely allies forging a path toward an uncertain future, guided by the shared light of engineering and the faint hope of unity amidst war. The bridge of the Aegis hummed with a silence so thick it pressed against the ears like a physical force. The air was thick with tension, and the scent of ozone from the flickering holographic displays that cast eerie shadows across the crew's faces. Every eye was fixed on the tall, bulky figure of Vrak as he stepped onto the deck, his grayish-brown, leathery skin glistening under the harsh lights. The heavy thud of his boots echoed through the chamber, each step a thunderous countdown to an unknown fate. Vrak's armor, weathered and adorned with a stark red sash, creaked softly as he moved, a sound that seemed to pierce the quiet like a knife. His gaze, cold and calculating, swept over the bridge crew before settling on Captain Sila's vein. The captain stood rigid, his hand hovering near his sidearm, a scar on his cheek twisting as he clenched his jaw. His dark blue uniform was crisp, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed the storm within. Elias Thorne stepped forward, his gray Federation tunic contrasting sharply with the vivid colors of the retro-futuristic controls behind him. He moved slowly, deliberately unarmed, his short dark hair disheveled from running a hand through it too many times. His eyes met Vrak's, and for a moment time seemed to freeze. Elias extended his hand, palm up, fingers slightly curved in a gesture of peace. The Krell equivalent was subtle, a slight tilt of Vrak's head, and then he mirrored the movement, his massive hand enveloping Elias. The silence stretched taut as a wire, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Captain Vane's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. "Elias, are you sure about this?" Elias didn't break eye contact with Vrak. "We need answers, Captain. This is our best chance." Vrak's voice rumbled like distant thunder. "You humans always seek answers in strange ways." His gaze shifted to Vane, and the captain stiffened further. The bridge crew watched in stunned silence, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and fascination. The panoramic view of space behind them, the swirling galaxies and stark emptiness, seemed to mock the chaos brewing within the ship. Every heartbeat echoed like a drumbeat, counting down to an uncertain future. Vane's fingers twitched closer to his sidearm. His eyes flicked to the tactical display, where the main Krell fleet hung in space like a dark cloud threatening to engulf them. Would they fire? Were those ships out there waiting for Vrak's signal or poised to obliterate any perceived betrayal? Elias' voice was steady but low, meant only for Vrak and Vane. "We want to understand each other, Vrak. This doesn't have to be a fight." Vrak grunted, a sound that could have been agreement or dismissal. His grip on Elias' hand tightened briefly before releasing. The tension didn't ease. Instead, it shifted, morphing into something more complex, a fragile alliance teetering on the edge of a precipice. Elias took a deep breath, his gaze flickering to the crew. "We'll need a secure channel. Vrak has information that could change everything." Vane's expression darkened, but he nodded sharply. The bridge hummed with a new kind of energy, a charged current of possibility and danger intertwined. The standoff had begun in earnest, and every heartbeat brought them closer to the precipice of either peace or war. In the grimy, cramped confines of his quarters, Elias Thorne stood by the narrow viewport, gazing out at the endless expanse of the asteroid field. The jagged rocks tumbled and spun in a ballet of destruction, their surfaces glinting like shards of obsidian under the cold glow of distant stars. The Federation cruiser hung there like a steel whale, navigating the treacherous currents with practiced ease. The door chime echoed through the small room, jolting Elias from his thoughts. He turned to see Dr. Maria Korvs standing in the doorway, her warm brown eyes reflecting the stark fluorescent lights of the corridor behind her. She held something small and gleaming in her hand, a silver chain with a tiny, intricately crafted pendant. "Maria," Elias said, surprise softening his voice. "What are you doing here?" She stepped inside, the door hissing shut behind her. The room seemed to shrink further with her presence, the air thick with unspoken words. She held up the chain, a small smile playing on her lips. "I wanted to give you this, a lucky charm of sorts." Elias raised an eyebrow but didn't resist as she stepped closer, the pendant glinting in the dim light. He could feel the heat of her fingers on his neck as she fastened it around his collar. Her touch lingered for a moment longer than necessary, and he looked down into her eyes. "Promise me you'll come back," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the station. Elias felt a lump form in his throat. He nodded, covering her hand with his own. "I promise." She smiled softly before stepping back, her professional demeanor slipping back into place. "I should go. Vrak is waiting for you on the bridge." As Maria left, Elias touched the pendant, feeling its cool metal against his skin. It was a strange sensation, this sense of something to lose, something worth fighting for beyond duty and honor. He joined Vrak on the bridge, where Captain Silas Vane stood stoically over a hollow table, displaying a three-dimensional map of the asteroid field. The Krell warrior loomed beside him, his bulky form clad in weathered armor, the red sash around his waist, a stark contrast to the grayish-brown of his leathery skin. Vrak looked up as Elias approached, his multifaceted eyes gleaming with an intensity that belied his usual stoic demeanor. "Elias," he rumbled, a gruff acknowledgement that held more weight than it once had. "Vrak!" Elias nodded to him before turning to the holomap. The asteroid field stretched out before them like a minefield, each rock tagged with data streams detailing composition and trajectory. At its heart pulsed a red beacon, the location Grell had revealed, a tin overseer ship tucked deep within the labyrinth of stone and metal. Vane pointed to a cluster of asteroids near the beacon. "This is where we make our insertion. The railguns can clear us a path through these smaller rocks, but after that," he looked to Vrak. The Krell grunted, his claws tapping against the table as he traced a route through the denser part of the field. "Krell knowledge of the terrain will be crucial here. We can navigate the tight passages, avoid detection." Elias studied the map, noting how Vrak's suggested path wove between larger asteroids, using their bulk for cover. It was a dance of sorts, a deadly ballet through a graveyard of stone. "And once we're in range?" Elias asked. Vrak's lips curled back in a grim approximation of a smile. "Then we show the tin what Krell fire can do," the captain nodded approvingly. "Our railguns will provide cover from orbit, but this is primarily your show, Thorne." He clapped Elias on the shoulder before turning to his console. "Make us proud, both of you." As Vane left to oversee preparations, Elias turned back to Vrak. The Krell met his gaze steadily, a silent understanding passing between them. They were becoming something more than allies, brothers in arms, forging a bond in the crucible of battle. Elias gestured to the map. "Let's go over this again. I want to know every twist and turn before we set foot out there." Vrak nodded, his voice a low growl as he began detailing their route once more. The asteroid field loomed large in Elias' mind, but so did Maria's words and the promise he'd made. He would return, not just for her, but for Vrak, for the crew, and for every life that depended on them taking down the tin overseer. The bridge hummed with tension and anticipation as they planned their assault, the silver chain around Elias' neck a constant reminder of what was at stake. Together, Human and Krell prepared to face the darkness, guided by a fragile alliance born from mutual necessity and growing respect. In the velvety blackness of space, the fleet materialized like a ghostly caravan, drawn by whispers from the Krell intel. Before them unfurled a spectacle that stole Elias Thorne's breath, a system of planets, each a crystalline jewel spinning in the cosmic void. They were globes of quartz and amethyst, faceted with colossal prisms that refracted starlight into kaleidoscopic ribbons dancing across vacuum. The largest planet loomed ahead, its surface a labyrinth of towering spires and chasms, each edge gleaming like freshly honed glass under an alien sky of swirling magentas and golds. Elias stood on the observation deck, his clear helmet reflecting the ethereal tableau. The airlock hummed softly behind him as he adjusted the comm unit at his collar. "Bridge, this is Thorne. Prepare a landing party. We're going down." The shuttle descended into the crystalline world, its engines echoing through cavernous valleys. Elias watched as shadows played hide and seek among the gleaming peaks, casting eerie blue hues on the inner surfaces of his helmet visor. They touched down in a clearing amidst colossal crystal formations that hummed softly, resonating with some unseen force. Elias stepped out onto the planet's surface, boots crunching against fine quartz dust. The air was thin but breathable, carrying a faint melody that seemed to seep from the very ground. It was haunting, a chorus of whispers and trills that danced on the edge of audibility, like memory fragments of long-forgotten lullabies. Following the sound, Elias navigated through mazes of crystalline structures until he found them. The Sylph. Tall, slender figures with skin like translucent quartz, glowing faintly blue and purple under some inner luminescence. They were adorned with silver chains that shimmered against their crystalline forms, pulsating with a dull resonance that muted their ethereal voices. Alara stood at the forefront, her eyes, voids of darkness within her luminescent face, fixed on Elias. Her voice was a cascade of harmonics, each note a fragile thread woven into an otherworldly tapestry. It flowed around him, through him, resonating deep within his chest. He felt it, not just heard it, but sensed the complex patterns interlocking in his mind. Elias listened intently, brow furrowed as he tried to decipher the symphony. Then, like a key sliding into an ancient lock, understanding clicked. The melody wasn't random, it was structured, layered with mathematical precision. Equations unfurled before his inner vision, symbols dancing across his thoughts. Higher dimensional geometries twisted and turned, describing forces he'd only theorized in dusty Federation archives. Higgs field manipulation, Elias whispered, awestruck. They're singing equations for quantum fluctuations. Alara tilted her head, those dark eyes studying him curiously. Her song shifted subtly, acknowledging his comprehension without ceasing its flow. Around them, other Sylph joined in, their voices harmonizing into a chorus that echoed through the crystal valleys. But there was pain behind the beauty. The silver chains around Alara's wrists and ankles hummed discordantly, dampening her song. Elias reached out, gently touching one of the chains. It was cold, almost lifeless compared to her radiant skin. He looked back at her, seeing not just a fragile being enslaved, but a sentient mathematician locked away from her own genius. "Who did this to you?" he asked softly. Alara's song faltered briefly before resuming, now carrying a bitter edge. The name formed in Elia's mind, Tin, a race of shadowy manipulators who saw value only in what they could control and exploit. A flicker of resolve ignited within him. These weren't just crystals singing, they were voices crying out for freedom. And Elias Thorne wasn't about to let such elegance be silenced by shackles. He turned back towards the shuttle, determination etched on his face. "We're getting you out of here," he promised Alara, though whether she understood his words or felt the conviction behind them, her song swelled with newfound hope. The crystalline world echoed their silent pact as Elias strode back towards the fleet, leaving behind the haunting melody and stepping into a mission born from harmony and defiance. In the velvety obsidian expanse of the nebula, the fleet of Federation vessels cut through swirls of amethyst and emerald gases like specters gliding through an otherworldly dream. The nebula, a titanic maelstrom of light and shadow, stretched out in all directions, its tendrils of luminous mist casting eerie, dancing patterns on the hulls of the ships. Elias Thorne stood on the bridge of his command vessel, the stark white and steel environment a stark contrast to the chromatic chaos outside. His gray Federation tunic, adorned with insignia that glinted under harsh artificial lights, made him a beacon amidst the shadowy silhouettes of consuls and officers. His short dark hair was rumpled from running fingers through it in thought, eyes scanning the holographic display that floated before him, a map charting the convoluted path they'd taken to track down the tin supply convoy. The bridge hummed with the low drone of machinery and the occasional sharp beep of alerts. Elias' voice cut through the ambient noise, clear and authoritative. "Report!" A nearby officer turned from her station, fingers dancing over holographic keys. "Convoy is holding position near Nebula Core Alpha, sir. Sensors detect multiple small craft, stealth signatures consistent with Nyx fighters." Elias nodded grimly. The Nyx, a name whispered in reverent tones by star pilots and supply runners alike. a nocturnal race of reptilian stealth pilots who navigated the void like phantoms. Their ships were shadows, their tactics silent strikes from the dark. A sudden flash on the main viewer drew his attention, a figure materializing out of the nebula's gloom. Tall and lithe, it moved with a fluid grace that was almost predatory. Sleek black scales shimmered under intermittent stabs of light filtering through the cosmic mist. Large yellow eyes, like twin suns in the night, regarded Elias with an intensity that seemed to pierce the very hull. Kale, the Nyx leader, stepped onto the bridge as if born from the shadows themselves. His matte black stealth suit blended seamlessly into the darkness behind him, save for the faint glow of bioluminescent markings pulsing along his arms and shoulders, a silent language of light. Elias felt a primal instinct stir within him, unease mingled with curiosity. This was no human adversary, Kale was something else entirely. Elias straightened, meeting those feline eyes without flinching. "Kale," he acknowledged, voice steady despite the churning in his gut. The Nyx moved closer, scales clicking softly against the deck plating. His tail, a sinuous appendage, lashed lazily behind him, a gesture Elias interpreted as both casual and predatory. "Elias Thorne," Kale rasped, voice like dry leaves rustling. "The loud human who brings his fleet into my hunting grounds." His gaze flicked around the bridge, taking in the bustle of activity with a hint of disdain. "You humans always announce your presence with fire and thunder." Elias bristled slightly but held his tongue. Instead, he gestured to the display showing their shared target, the tin convoy. "We're here for the same reason you are, Kale, to disrupt tin supply lines." Kale's eyes narrowed, and Elias could almost see the gears turning behind those golden orbs. The Nyx leader was sizing him up, weighing the worth of this alliance, or potential conflict. "You respect stealth," Kale murmured, more statement than question, "but you do not understand it." He turned back to Elias, yellow eyes boring into him. "My people have danced in these shadows for generations. We know their patterns, their whispers." Elias leaned forward, hands clasped behind his back. "And we bring firepower and numbers," he countered. "Together we can cripple the tin's ability to move supplies through this sector." Kale considered this, tail twitching thoughtfully. Then he nodded slowly. "Very well, loud human, but know this, if you betray our trust or if your thunder drowns out my whispers, there will be consequences." He paused, then added softly, "And in the void there is no mercy." Elias met his gaze unflinchingly. "Understood, Kale, we're not here to make enemies, unless we have to." The Nyx leader's lips curled back in what might have been a smile or a baring of teeth. Either way, Elias took it as acknowledgement. Behind him, the nebula churned and pulsed, casting long, eerie shadows across the bridge. As Kale melted back into the darkness, leaving only the faint glow of his bioluminescent markings trailing after him, Elias felt a shiver run down his spine. This alliance was tenuous at best, but necessary. In the swirling maelstrom of the nebula, humanity and Nyx stood united, at least for now, forged by mutual interest against a common foe. And so, amidst the shadows and the light, the Void Stalkers prepared to strike. The hum of the Aegis's engines throbbed beneath their feet like a distant heartbeat, pulsating with an energy that seemed to echo the tension in the room. The circular chamber was bathed in a kaleidoscope of lights, soft blues and purples for the Sylph, harsher whites for the Krell, and a dim, infrared glow for the Nyx. The air was thick with a myriad of scents. The acrid tang of Vrak's leathery skin, the faint metallic undertone of Alara's crystalline form, and the musky aroma of Kale's reptilian physiology, all mingling with the sterile ozone scent of the ship itself. Elias Thorne stood at the head of a round table polished to a mirror sheen, his gray Federation tunic stark against the vibrant chaos of the room. Behind him, Captain Sila's Vane loomed like a silent sentinel, his square jaw set, scar a thin white line against his tanned cheek. The viewscreen behind them displayed a menacing black triangle, a tin ship, a grim reminder of why they were all here. Vrak, the Krell representative, sat to Elias' right, his bulky form encased in weathered armor adorned with a crimson sash. His grayish-brown skin seemed to absorb the light, casting deep shadows across his rugged features. He grunted occasionally, low and guttural, each sound resonating like distant thunder. Ilara, the Sylph, occupied the seat to Elias' left. Her translucent crystalline form cast prismatic patterns on the tabletop, shifting with her subtle movements. Silver chains adorned her slender frame, tinkling softly as she gestured, her voice a melodic hum that danced at the edge of human perception. Kale, the Nyx, remained in the shadows opposite Elias, his sleek black scales blending with the darkness. Only his yellow eyes were visible, gleaming like twin moons in the night. His suit, matte black and form-fitting, made him almost invisible, save for the occasional shimmer of movement. Elias raised his hands, palms down, a universal gesture for calm. "Friends," he began, his voice steady despite the cacophony around him. "We are here because we share a common enemy." He gestured to the view screen, the tin ship looming like a dark cloud on the horizon. Vrak grumbled something in Krelli's, sharp and abrupt. Elias translated aloud for the group. "He says we should be attacking, not talking." Ilara's hum turned sharp, her crystalline form flickering with agitation. She spoke in Scythian, her words flowing like a stream of liquid light. "She asks," Elias interpreted, "if the Krell can't distinguish between bravery and foolishness." Kale hissed softly, his voice a low rasp that sent a shiver down Elias' spine. He didn't need translation to understand the Nyx's disdain. "He says," Elias filled in, "that both races are too impulsive, lacking strategy." Sila's vein leaned forward, his deep voice cutting through the tension. "We need more than just brute force or swift strikes. We need a coordinated effort." Elias nodded, turning back to the table. "Exactly. That's why I propose we form a joint task force, a strike team comprising representatives from each of our races." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "We hit them where it hurts most, a major tin stronghold." Vrak snorted, but there was less hostility in his tone this time. Ilara's crystalline form pulsed thoughtfully, her chains clinking as she considered Elias' proposal. Kale's yellow eyes narrowed, calculating. Elias continued. "The tin are a monolithic threat, but we have diversity on our side. Our different strengths can complement each other. The Krell's strength, the Sylth's technology, the Nyx's stealth. Together, we stand a real chance." The room fell silent for a moment, the only sounds the distant hum of the ship and the soft clicks and whispers of the alien representatives. Then slowly Vrak nodded. "We will fight with you," he said in broken Federation standard, his voice like grinding stone. Ilara's hum turned softer, more agreeable. "Yes, we will join this task force." Her crystalline form glowed brighter, reflecting her resolve. Kale's hiss was almost a purr of agreement. "The Nyx are in." Elias looked around the table, seeing the determination in each face, hearing it in every translated word. He turned to Silas, who nodded grimly. Elias stood taller, his voice ringing clear and strong. "Then it is decided. We form the Free Systems Alliance, united against the tin threat." The words hung in the air, a beacon of hope amidst the chaos. The chamber seemed to hold its breath. And then, one by one, the representatives of humanity, Krell, Sylth, and Nyx raised their hands or appendages in a gesture of unity. It was a moment of raw, unadulterated solidarity, a testament to their shared resolve against the encroaching darkness. The Aegis pulsed with newfound energy, as if the ship itself felt the spark of their alliance. The journey ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty, but in that moment they stood together, ready to face whatever lay beyond the stars. In the velvet void of space, silence reigned supreme, an eerie quietude that swallowed even the hum of Federation engines as the fleet held its breath behind the cloak of Nyx stealth fighters. The battleships, vast and powerful, hulking monoliths of white and blue steel, seemed to vanish against the cosmic canvas, their presence betrayed only by the faintest shimmer in the darkness. Elias Thorne hunched over a console in the dimly lit engineering bay, his fingers dancing over controls with an urgency that belied the calm in his eyes. The air was thick with tension and the hum of machinery, but Elias' focus was elsewhere. He was listening to something only he could hear. The shield frequencies pulsed through him like a symphony, each note a vibration against his consciousness. Ilara stood beside him, her crystalline form casting an otherworldly glow over the controls. She sang softly, her voice a haunting melody that seemed to weave into the very fabric of the ship's systems. Elias adjusted dials and switches in time with her song, tuning the fleet's shields as if he were fine-tuning an engine. His brow furrowed in concentration, gray Federation tunic, stark against the retro-futuristic panel of lights and gauges. Captain Sila's Vane watched from the bridge, his square jaw set firm beneath the scar that traced his cheek. He gripped the armrest of his command chair, knuckles white as he stared at the main view screen. The display showed a field of menacing black triangles, Piton ships, their edges gleaming like obsidian against the starlit backdrop. "Nix fighters report clear path through Sector 4, came Kale's voice over the comms, his reptilian tones smooth despite the tension. "Initiating guidance sequence now." The Nix stealth fighters, sleek and black as shadows, darted ahead like spectral escorts, their forms barely discernible against the void. The Federation fleet followed in their wake, a silent, ghostly procession through the tin blockade. Dr. Mariakorv's voice cut through the hum of the comms, steady and calm. "Vital signs stable across all decks," she reported, her warm brown eyes scanning readouts on her medical console. "Bridge crew shows elevated heart rates but within operational parameters." Silas nodded grimly, his gaze locked on the view screen as the fleet slid deeper into tin territory. The silence stretched taut, a wire pulled to its breaking point. Suddenly an alarm pierced the stillness, a sharp, insistent wail that jolted everyone from their focused stances. Elias looked up sharply, his hands freezing over the controls. Alara's song faltered, her eyes widening as she turned to him. "Shield breach on port side," a voice shouted over the comms. Elias' fingers flew back to the dials, his brow furrowing deeper as he listened intently to the frequencies. "Piton frequency shift detected," he called out, his voice barely audible over the alarm. "Adjusting shielding harmonics." Alara's song rose again, stronger and more urgent, her silver chains clinking softly as she moved with newfound intensity. Elias matched her urgency, his hands a blur on the controls. The bridge erupted into chaos, officers barking orders, consoles flashing warnings. Silas barked commands, his voice cutting through the cacophony like a blade. "Evasive maneuvers. Get us out of their targeting range." Dr. Korv's voice remained a steady presence amidst the turmoil. "Port side medbay reporting minor injuries, treating now." The Nix fighters darted and weaved, guiding the battleships through a maze of tin ships. Elias' hands never stopped moving, his eyes locked on the shields as he wrestled with the alien frequencies. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but his focus never wavered. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the alarm fell silent. The fleet emerged from the blockade, the black triangles fading into the distance like bad dreams dissolving in the dawn. Elias slumped slightly, a shaky breath escaping his lips. Alara's song softened, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of relief and shared triumph. Silas let out a slow exhale, leaning back in his chair as he surveyed the bridge crew. "Good work, all," he said, his voice gruff but laden with respect. "Let's get back on course." Elias looked up at Alara, a tired smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "That was close," he murmured. She nodded, her crystalline form glowing softly in the dim light. "But we made it," she replied, her voice like distant bells. "Together." The corridors of the tin command ship stretched out like veins of cold, sterile metal, bathed in an eerie red luminescence that cast stark shadows across the sharp angles and unforgiving surfaces. The air hummed with a low, ominous vibration, as if the very vessel pulsed with an artificial heartbeat. Elias Thorne led the charge, his gray Federation tunic slicked with sweat and splattered with remnants of combat. His breath came in ragged gasps, each exhale misting slightly in the frigid atmosphere. Vrak lumbered beside him, the Krell warrior's bulky form clad in weathered armor, a red sash stark against the dull gray-brown of his leathery skin. The creases around Vrak's eyes were etched deeper by fatigue and the relentless toll of battle, but his grip on the plasma rifle remained steadfast. The corridors echoed with the distant clatter of boots and the occasional burst of weapon fire, a symphony of violence that had become their grim accompaniment. Elias rounded a bend, his heart pounding in syncopation with the ship's eerie hum. Suddenly they came upon it, an overseer standing tall and still as a statue at the end of the corridor. The tin entity was a stark contrast to the chaos around them. A sleek, cybernetic form with smooth, obsidian skin that reflected the red lighting like a pool of dark blood. Its face was a polished mirror, devoid of features save for two glowing red sensors that regarded Elias and Vrak with an unblinking stare. Elias' steps faltered for a moment, his hand tightening around the grip of his rifle. The overseer moved then, not with the jerky motions of a machine, but with an unnatural fluidity, each step precise and calculated. It glided forward, the hum from its mechanical body harmonizing eerily with the ship's rhythm. Elias, Vrak's voice was a low growl barely audible over the distant cacophony. This one, it is different. Elias nodded, his gaze locked on the overseer. The horror wasn't in its appearance, it was in the absolute void where empathy should have been. This entity did not feel anger, fear, or even curiosity. It simply processed data and made decisions based on algorithms that viewed organic life as a disease to be eradicated. Maria knelt in the shadows behind them, her white medical tunic stark against the grimy floor. Her hands were steady despite the trembling of her lips as she tended to a wounded Marine whose groans mixed with the hum of the ship. She pressed gauze to a gaping wound on his side, her movements practiced and efficient. Elias spared her a brief glance, grateful for her calm amidst the storm. The overseer stopped a few paces away, its red sensors flickering as it scanned them. "Organic entities," it intoned, voice smooth and synthetic. "Your presence is an anomaly. This vessel will not tolerate anomalies." Elias' grip on his rifle tightened further. He felt Vrak tense beside him, the Krell's breath growing heavier with restrained aggression. "We're here to stop you," Elias said, his voice steady despite the churning in his gut. "To end your pruning." The overseer tilted its head slightly, a motion that seemed almost curious but devoid of genuine interest. "Pruning is necessary for order. Your kind represents chaos, disorder. You are the disease." Vrak's plasma rifle hummed to life, the barrel glowing with energy. "We will not be pruned," he growled. Elias raised his own weapon, aiming at the overseer's smooth chest. But before either of them could fire, a sudden explosion rocked the corridor behind them. A team of Federation Marines rushed past, their faces streaked with grime and sweat. They exchanged nods with Elias, adding their firepower to the standoff. The overseer didn't react to the commotion, its gaze never wavering from Elias and Vrak. "You are outmatched," it stated calmly. "Resistance is futile." Elias felt a surge of anger, not just at the overseer, but at the cold calculations that had led them here. He stepped forward, his rifle steady. "We'll see about that." Vrak's roar echoed through the corridor as he fired, the blast of plasma illuminating the sterile metal walls with a brilliant flash. Elias joined him, their weapons synchronizing in a relentless barrage. The overseer moved with inhuman speed, evading each shot with grace, but it did not retaliate. It simply processed and adapted. Maria's hands continued to work on the wounded Marine, her focus unbroken even as the battle raged around them. She was a beacon of calm amidst the storm, a testament to their resolve. Elias drew strength from her presence, his heart pounding with determination. They would not fall without a fight. The overseer might see them as chaos, but they would show it the power of that chaos, unpredictable, relentless, and unyielding. The battle raged on, each side locked in a deadly dance of wills and weapons. Elias and Vrak fought with every ounce of strength they had left, their bodies aching from the relentless assault. But the overseer stood unyielding, its mechanical precision a chilling contrast to their raw fury. The corridor echoed with the sounds of war, a symphony of steel against flesh, plasma against metal. And through it all, Maria's steady hands continued to mend, her presence a silent reminder of what they were fighting for. Life in all its messy, chaotic glory. The bridge of the Aegis hummed with a tense energy that was almost palpable, like the charged air before a storm. Elias Thorne stood at his station, eyes fixed on the main viewport where the vast expanse of space was filled with an armada so immense it defied comprehension. Thousands of ships stretched out in both directions, a swarming mass of metal and light against the deep black canvas of the void. Captain Sila's Vane paced behind him, his dark blue uniform stark against the glowing consoles. The scar on his cheek seemed to glow under the harsh bridge lighting, a remnant of battles past that now served as a grim reminder of what lay ahead. His voice echoed through the chamber, steady and commanding. "All ships form defensive line Alpha-7. Shields at maximum, railguns ready. Elias' fingers danced over his console, relaying the captain's orders to the fleet. The Aegis shuddered slightly as its engines roared to life, adjusting position with a grace that belied its massive size. The void before them teemed with movement, a chaotic ballet of destruction. Federation ships, gleaming white and blue, interspersed with the jagged forms of Krell cruisers, glowing Sylph vessels, and the eerie black silhouettes of Nyx dreadnoughts. Together, they presented a united front against the onslaught of tin triangles descending like a plague of locusts from above Neptune's swirling azure surface. The first salvos were exchanged with a silent fury. Railguns barked, sending streams of tungsten slugs hurtling through space, a relentless rain of lead that streaked across Elias' visual display like metallic comets. The explosions when they hit were muted by the vacuum, silent blooms of fire and debris that danced in the void before dissipating into nothingness. Maria Korv stood in the medbay, a sterile white haven amidst the storm raging outside. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she prepared syringes filled with stimulants and nanobot vials designed to knit flesh back together. The room hummed with the soft beeps of medical scanners and the whirring of automated surgical units standing at attention, ready for the inevitable tide of wounded that would soon pour through her doors. Jerk Thalos' voice crackled over the comms. "Captain, we've got incoming. Multiple tin ships breaking formation." Elias felt a jolt of adrenaline as he relayed Jerk's warning to Vane. The captain nodded grimly, barking out new orders. "All guns, target those breakaways. We can't let them flank us." The Aegis groaned under the strain as its railguns pivoted and fired in unison with a deafening rumble. The bridge shook with each impact, the thrum of energy coursing through the ship's frame like a heartbeat. Elias watched as tracer rounds laced through space, painting lines of fire against the darkness. The battle unfolded before him in real time, a symphony of chaos and order colliding. Explosions bloomed across the fleet, Federation ships going dark one by one, their silhouettes crumbling into drifting wreckage. Maria braced herself as the first casualty rushed in, a young ensign with blood streaming down his face from a gash on his forehead. She guided him to a med-gel, her voice calm and reassuring despite the turmoil outside. "You're going to be fine," she murmured, activating the gel that would seal his wound and deliver painkillers. The medbay doors slammed open again, revealing more casualties, officers and crew members alike, their uniforms torn and bodies bearing the brutal marks of war. Maria moved swiftly between them all, her voice a steady anchor in the storm. Back on the bridge, Elias' console blazed with alerts as ships reported damage or requested reinforcements. Vane's commands remained unwavering. "Hold the line, we cannot yield an inch." The void filled with the silent screams of dying ships and the relentless march of tin triangles, their black forms an unending tide. Yet amidst the carnage, there was a fierce determination burning in Elias' chest, fueled by Vane's resolve, Maria's dedication to saving lives, and the knowledge that behind them stood Earth and every world the Federation had sworn to protect. The battle raged on, a titanic struggle between light and darkness unfolding against Neptune's azure backdrop. For now, all they could do was fight, and hope it would be enough. In the throbbing heart of the Aegis, Elias Thorne clung to the pulsating lever like a drowning man to a lifeline. The Higgs core blazed before him, a vortex of violet energy that seemed to devour the very air, casting elongated shadows that danced macabrely on the bulkheads. His gray tunic, once crisp, now hung in sodden tatters, plastered to his sweat-slicked skin by the infernal heat radiating from the core. The stench of ozone and something more sinister, radiation, a cloying perfume that stuck to the back of his throat. Ilara stood nearby, her crystalline form shimmering under the harsh glow. Silver chains tinkled softly as she moved, her voice rising in a haunting melody that echoed through the chamber. The resonance frequency, the key to harnessing the Higgs field on a galactic scale, was a symphony of discordant beauty, each note a blade cutting through Elias' frayed nerves. Pain lanced through him with every beat of his heart, radiation sickness gnawing at his bones like some insidious beast. His vision swam, and the lever seemed to slip from his grasp, but he clamped down harder, knuckles white as bone. The static-filled air crackled around him, a maelstrom of energy that threatened to consume him whole. Then there was her voice, Dr. Maria Corv's, a lifeline in the storm, cutting through the cacophony like a beacon. Elias, she said, calm and steady over the comm's hollow display, her warm, brown eyes fixed on him with an intensity that bordered on desperation. "You're doing it! Hold on!" Her words were a balm against the fire raging within him. He could almost feel her touch, firm yet gentle, anchoring him to reality. The Higgs core pulsed in time with Alara's song, its energy spiraling outward like a cosmic ripple. "Radiation levels are critical," Maria continued, her voice unyielding as she recited the grim facts. "But you're stabilizing it. Keep going." Elias gritted his teeth, his body trembling under the relentless onslaught of heat and radiation. Sweat stung his eyes, blurring his vision further, but he refused to close them. The core's violet light was a living thing, writhing and twisting as if trying to break free from its confinement. "Think of why you're doing this," Maria urged, her voice a soft whisper amidst the chaos. "You're saving more than just us, Elias. You're saving everything." His thoughts flickered to the Tin Fleet, their ships like metallic leviathans devouring stars and worlds alike. The galaxy hung in the balance, and here he was, clinging to a sparking lever, his body breaking down atom by atom. But there she was again, Maria's voice, her eyes never leaving his through the hollow display. For her, for everyone she represented, Elias dug deep. He found reserves of strength he didn't know existed, channeled the pain into determination. The core shuddered violently, a massive surge of energy coursing through it like an electrical storm. Elias' grip faltered, his fingers convulsing around the lever. A scream tore from his lips, raw and primal, as searing agony lanced through every fiber of his being. Maria's voice remained steady, unwavering. "Elias, focus on my voice. You can do this." He fought back the darkness clamoring at the edges of his vision, her words a lifeline keeping him tethered to consciousness. The Higgs core throbbed in time with Alara's song, its energy stabilizing into a coherent wave front that pulsed outward. The fleet, he thought distantly, the tin ships beginning to shudder under the galactic resonance. Their shields flickered like candles in a storm, the once unstoppable force faltering against the might of the Higgs field. Elias' vision dimmed, his strength waning, but Maria was there, her voice clear as day. "You're almost there, Elias," she said, her eyes filled with pride and something more profound. He couldn't fail now, not when they were so close. With a final surge of willpower, he held onto the lever tighter than ever before, his body convulsing with the effort. The core let out one last blinding pulse of violet light, and then, abruptly, the energy stabilized into a harmonious resonance. Alara's song tapered off, her crystalline form flickering weakly before she collapsed to the deck. Elias sagged against the lever, his breath coming in ragged gasps, every inch of him screaming in agony. But he had done it. The Higgs field rippled across the galaxy, and the Tin Fleet began to falter. Maria's voice came through the comms, softer now but no less steadfast. "You did it, Elias. You saved us all." He wanted to reply, to tell her how much she meant to him in that moment of triumph and despair. But darkness claimed him before he could find the words. His last thought was of Maria's eyes, warm and unyielding, guiding him through the storm. In the cold, silent expanse of the void, the Alliance fleet held their breath as a sudden, invisible tide swept through the Tin Armada. The resonance wave hit like an unseen tsunami, crashing against the psychic barriers that had long enslaved countless species to the will of the silent masters. Elias Thorne gripped the railing of the FNS Aegis's bridge, his knuckles pale as he stared at the ocean of enemy ships sprawled before them. Captain Sela's vein barked orders, his voice a steady drumbeat against the sudden chaos. "All hands, brace for impact. They're turning on each other out there." The Tin Fleet, once a relentless machine of coordination and precision, began to fracture. The sleek, triangular tin ships that had cut through Alliance lines like knives now jolted erratically, their formation dissolving into disarray. Elias watched as a massive tin dreadnought veered sharply, its ventral guns opening fire on a nearby cruiser of the same design. Explosions bloomed like deadly flowers against the stark blackness of space. "Elias, look!" shouted Vrak from his station, his bulky form hunched over consoles not designed for Krell hands. His voice rumbled with a savage satisfaction. "They're slaves! They're fighting back!" Thousands upon thousands of jagged Krell warships and sleek Nyx corvettes surged forth from the shadows of the Tin Fleet, turning on their former masters with a ferocity born of centuries of oppression. The void erupted in a symphony of violence. Railgun tracers painted crimson streaks across the darkness, and plasma bolts lanced out like tongues of hungry flame. Ilara's voice crackled over the comms, her Sylph accent sharp as shattered glass. "The chains are breaking, Captain Vane. Their control signals. They're severed." Kale's low growl followed, his Nyx tongue hissing against the translator. "Their minds are free. They will not stop until every last tin is silenced." Elias couldn't tear his gaze from the spectacle unfolding before him. A swarm of Krell fighters descended on a tin destroyer like a horde of metallic locusts, their weapons chewing through armor plating with brutal efficiency. The destroyer listed, its engines flaring wildly before it spiraled into a catastrophic implosion. The FNS Aegis shuddered as Vane gave the order to open fire. "Target those tin dreadnoughts. Give our new allies some cover." The Alliance battleship's main batteries roared to life, hurling bolts of pure energy into the melee. The bridge crew worked in a frenzy, targeting systems, straining to keep up with the sudden shift in combat dynamics. Elias turned to Vrak, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. "Can you reach them, the Krell and Nyx? Can we coordinate?" Vrak nodded, tendons standing out on his thick neck as he focused on his console. "I am trying, Thorne. But their communications are raw, chaotic. They fight with instinct now." Silas Vane stood at the center of it all, barking orders like a general rallying his troops. His scar glowed red under the harsh bridge lights, a stark contrast to his stern expression. "Keep those guns hot. We need to press this advantage." The battle raged on, a maelstrom of metal and fire that seemed to consume the very fabric of space. The Tin Fleet, once an unstoppable juggernaut, crumbled from within like a sandcastle beneath a relentless tide. Elias watched in awe as the silent masters fell, their once omnipotent will shattered by the sudden rebellion of those they had long enslaved. A Krell battlecruiser, its hull scarred and pitted, pulled alongside the Aegis. Through the viewport, Elias saw Vrak's kin, massive, grayish-brown forms moving with a brutal grace as they maneuvered their vessel through the chaos. Ilara's voice cut through the calm static, tinged with triumph. "They are turning to us, Captain, the Krell. They seek alliance." Vane's response was gruff but clear. "Tell them we stand with them. Together we end this now." Elias felt a surge of hope amid the carnage. This was more than just a battle. It was a reckoning, a turning point in a war that had spanned lifetimes. The chains were broken, and from the ashes of rebellion, a new dawn rose over the shattered remnants of the Tin Fleet. The hum of the medbay was a lulling symphony to Elias Thorne as he lay propped up on the biobed, his gray Federation tunic neatly folded beside him. The sterile white walls and the soft glow of medical panels had become familiar in his weeks of recovery, but today they felt different. There was a quietude that echoed through the chamber, an absence of the usual frantic beeps and hurried footsteps that had once marked their desperate struggle against the tin. The door whisked open with a gentle hiss, and Dr. Maria Korv stepped in. Her dark hair was swept up into a neat bun, and her warm brown eyes held a softness he hadn't seen before. She carried with her an air of tranquility that seemed to fill the room, making everything feel lighter. "Elias," she said softly, approaching his bedside, "you're looking better." He offered her a weak smile. "Better than what?" "A corpse," Maria chuckled, pulling up a chair to sit beside him. Her hand found his, and he felt a jolt of warmth that had nothing to do with the medical monitors beeping softly behind them. "Better than you were," she corrected gently. "How's the galaxy?" Elias asked, his gaze drifting to the viewport beyond her shoulder. The swirling colors of a distant nebula painted an ethereal backdrop, a stark contrast to the void of fear that had once consumed their universe. Maria glanced over her shoulder at the view before turning back to him. "It's quiet out there," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The tin are gone. The stars seem brighter somehow." Elias nodded slowly, his fingers tightening around hers. "We did it, didn't we? We actually did it." "You did," Maria corrected. You led us to victory, Elias. He looked down at their entwined hands, the calluses on her fingers a testament to the countless lives she'd saved. And you kept me alive long enough to see it through. Maria smiled, a soft blush tinting her cheeks. For a moment they just sat there, hands clasped together in silent acknowledgement of all they had endured and overcome. "There's something I need to tell you, Elias," Maria finally said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "I know you've lost so much. Lana, she was an incredible person. But I can't help but think that maybe there's room in your heart for someone else." Elias looked into her eyes and saw the vulnerability beneath her strength. He reached up, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear before cupping her cheek gently. "Maria," he whispered, "you've been by my side every step of the way. You're not just someone I can share this new life with, you are my new beginning." Her eyes welled up slightly, and she leaned into his touch. "I love you, Elias Thorne." "I love you too," he replied, pulling her closer until their foreheads rested against each other. The moment was soft and tender, a fragile peace amidst the chaos of their past battles. It was a new horizon, unmarred by shadows or fear. They stood at the precipice of hope, ready to step into whatever lay beyond. Later that day, Elias found himself on the bridge of the FNS Aegis, the hum of its retro-futuristic machinery a comforting rhythm beneath his feet. The main viewport stretched before him like a vast canvas of stars and colors, an infinite expanse untainted by darkness or dread. It was a view he could have only dreamed of in those long nights spent huddled against cold metal walls, fighting for survival. Captain Vane stood beside the helmsman's station, his square-jawed profile cast in dramatic lighting from above. Jerk leaned against one of the consoles near the rear of the bridge, arms crossed over his light blue uniform, a familiar smirk playing on his lips. Vrak loomed nearby, his Krell bulk imposing yet reassuring. Elias walked to the viewport, Maria's hand warm and secure in his. They stood there, side by side, gazing out at the cosmos. The galaxy stretched before them was vibrant. Nebulas blazed like jewels against velvet blackness. Distant suns cast golden halos across starfields. Planets swirled with life-giving hues of blue and green. "It's beautiful," Maria murmured, leaning into Elias. Vane approached from behind them. "A sight worth fighting for." Elias nodded, turning to face his comrades in arms. "We did it, didn't we? We gave the free systems back their freedom." Jerk pushed off from the console and joined them at the viewport. "And now what? Retirement on some distant paradise planet?" Vrak rumbled a deep laugh that echoed through the bridge. "You would never settle for such simplicity, human?" Elias grinned, looking back out at the stars. "No, maybe not, but we've earned it, the chance to choose our own path forward." Captain Vane clapped him on the shoulder. "And you'll lead us, Elias, wherever that path takes us." Elias felt a surge of pride and determination. This was his crew, his family now, and together they would forge ahead into whatever adventures lay beyond the horizon. "Speaking of paths," Jerk said with a teasing gleam in his eye, "how about you share some of your famous coffee stash? I hear it's not rehydrated sludge from the ration packs." Elias chuckled. "Only if you promise to keep your distance while I brew it up." He glanced at Maria. "I've got just the thing for a celebratory toast." As he turned toward one of the nearby consoles, ready to retrieve his precious stash of real coffee beans, Elias caught sight of their reflections in the viewport glass. Two figures standing together against the backdrop of a galaxy reborn, hopeful and united. The future stretched out before them, filled with challenges yet unknown but also brimming with possibilities. And in that moment, as he held Maria's hand tightly within his own, Elias Thorne knew. This was more than just survival, it was life anew.